Good evening everyone, coming to you again with another video, and today I wanted to briefly discuss a film that I feel is sort of overlooked. I'm sure that there's some people that might have heard of this film, there's some people that may have not have heard of this film, but I feel like a lot of the times it doesn't seem like the public really recognizes this film or references this film. And even though I don't think it's obviously perfect, and I want to make it clear too that all of the underrated films that I do are not perfect, and I don't hold them to like a classic standard, I still feel that this one gets kind of put under the bus, and I feel that it would be nice if I could share a little bit of what I know of the film and see whether or not people would be interested and invested in seeing it. So without further ado, let me discuss Children of Men, which came out in around the 2000s, so it is fairly recent. And it stars Clive Owen, and he plays Theo Farron. And basically this character, Theo, lives in a sort of apocalyptic world where women are infertile and have been infertile for 18 years. So not only do we have this kind of scientific discrepancy happening to our species, we also have a world where a lot of nations are falling apart. But Britain, for some reason, seems to be the only one that's somehow stable. The interesting thing is that looking at this in a more broader perspective, it feels a little bit like V for Vendetta, but V for Vendetta focuses on completely different issues when comparing the two, obviously. So I just don't want my audience to get mixed up with the two. Is the only comparison that I could really draw between the two is just the fact that Britain is the only somewhat stable country in a sort of or semi-apocalyptic world where there's a lot of poverty and starvation and crime and so on and so forth. And since Britain is the only stable country, it is also a world where people from other countries, in particular Europe, are traveling to Britain and trying to see if they can sort of survive there. Unfortunately, this is way too much for the British government to handle, so they obviously capture all of the immigrants and basically just sort of send them back, or just hold them for a while, so that it discourages more people from trying to cross into British shores. So how our main character Theo sort of plays into this whole setup is that he's just sort of an average ordinary man who did have a child that died a little early on. I think it was from a sort of a flu, and you'll kind of see how this sort of, I guess, somewhat impacts the emotional state that he has with Julianne Moore's character, who is Julianne Taylor. And even though it's not really at the forefront, it's sort of there. And it is kind of emphasized too that in this world, children are, I guess, really not living as long. I think they even advertised it at one point, or they put it on the news at one point early on in the movie that the oldest child, I guess, passed away. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember exactly the context of that particular scenario, but it was something to do with a child being able to grow up for so long and then die. It's almost like this world plays itself to the fact that women started to give birth to children who were rather weak and incapable of surviving for a long period of time. And then it seemed like that this world got to the point to where women couldn't give conceive anymore. For whatever reason, nobody knows, and that's not a question that's answered throughout the film. So again, it is that kind of a world that this movie tries to create. It's semi-scientific while also being somewhat apocalyptic. So you kind of have this kind of interesting combination, which I think is really unique, and that's why I kind of consider this film underrated, because I don't feel like a lot of films really explore this kind of interesting mix and blend of these two kinds of scenarios together. So basically, the plot revolves around trying to get this particular woman, who Theo finds out is actually pregnant with a child, and this shocks him. Like, you'll see in the when he discovers this, he is completely shocked, because it has been 18 years since a child has been, I guess, conceived, so he's just really blown away by it. And it's basically his job to go and get to this and get this woman, who's named Key, played by Claire Hope Ashieti. Apologize if I'm pronouncing that name wrong. I'm terrible at pronouncing things. He basically just needs to get this character Key to a particular location, and there's like this organization that will sort of take her in and sort of protect her. That's the idea throughout the entire story. That's the whole main gist that you have to understand with the story. Now, there's a lot of obstacles that they come across, and you'll see how these kinds of politics sort of play in. In particular, Julianne Taylor's character is a part of this. I guess it's called they claim it as a militant immigrants' rights movement, and that's how Theo manages to get in contact with Kay eventually. And to be honest, I really don't want to give a whole lot away for the plot, because this is a really plot-driven piece. So I'm just going to kind of leave this at the door here and just basically tell you that's really the main gist of the plot. There's a lot of other things that encompass this plot, but I don't want to give so much away. There's also another character that I think I should briefly discuss, and this guy's named Jasper Palmer, and he's played by Michael Caine, which is pretty cool. And he's kind of like this hippie who's Theo's friend, and he sort of helps him out, and you'll kind of see how he sort of plays a role in the story, and allows the story to sort of progress. But ultimately, I don't want to really give anything away plot-wise, because this is a movie that does have sort of these twists and turns, and I don't really want to spoil it for anybody. Why I do think this film is underrated is, again, I feel like that the concept that they bring up in this film is interesting, and something that I don't think a lot of people talk about. And I think it is interesting to think of the idea of what if our species wasn't able to reproduce anymore, and what if we somehow ended up dying off. I think that's a really interesting concept, and I'm surprised that not a lot of movies have really discussed this at all. I think this might be new phenomena, new territory for people, and I think it's something that definitely Hollywood could use as an interesting plot point. And the fact that not only that they combine this aspect of infertility, they also combine it with this kind of a messed up apocalyptic kind of world, and I think that it intensifies the drama and makes the plot more structured. And then you sort of add in these kinds of political undertones, especially with the organization that Julianne Taylor works for. You'll see how they sort of have they sort of have their own opinions on how exactly they want to move forward with Key, who's carrying the only child that has ever been conceived for the past 18 years. And I believe the film states that it takes place in 2027. So 18 years would be like, that would be 20, that would be, oh man, I'm not good at math right now, but it would be a little bit past our time, currently in 2013. So it's I only say that in order to give you kind of a time frame as to when the story takes place. I find it interesting that it does take place so close to our time, but I'm sure that the author or the people that worked on this movie had a reasoning for that. And not only is this a fairly plot-driven movie, it's also fairly action-driven. It seems to be, it seems to pace itself, I think, fairly well. When there needs to be talking, there is sort of talking, but there are some moments where it kind of just drifts from being focused on the plot, especially with kind of Michael Caine's character. But I think it's just sort of a way to get the audience, I guess, more invested into the characters as opposed to just what's going on within the plot. So again, that's up, I think, for the viewer to ultimately decide. I feel that it executes itself fairly well, and kind of being unexpected at times. I think it does take these kinds of twists and turns where you don't really know what to expect, and I find it interesting that sometimes it takes it into the view of, like, we're looking at this through Theo's perspective, and I think that really works, especially when he's running and he's going through all of these obstacles. You kind of feel like you're there and you're with him going through this kind of a journey. Now, I would say that the characters are not really all that developed, and they're not all that, I guess you could say, as fleshed out or as interesting. But I will say Theo comes off as a fairly realistic character for his time, and Michael Caine is just kind of a hippie. No other word to really describe his character other than he kind of fits the hippie formula. And Julianne Moore's character is kind of like the independent, tough woman who wants to get a job done. And again, these characters are similar to what we've seen before, but I feel like what really holds this film is sort of the concepts, the ideas, and the way that it's structured. I don't think this is really a character-focused piece. It's more about the circumstances that the world is sort of going through, and how these characters sort of go through those circumstances. So it is that kind of a film, and I think it could work for a lot of people, and it could also not work for a lot of people. But for me, I feel like it works, and it feels like what it's saying is interesting, and I feel like it's well executed, and I think the performances are well done. And overall, even though it is a fairly grim film, it still offers this kind of ray of hope, and this idea of kind of a miracle, and that unexpected good things can come out of things that have been bad over a certain amount of years. There's like the ups and downs. So the film sort of emphasizes this point, especially with Kay's character sort of being like sort of a hope for people. So I think that's fairly interesting, and I think the way it's executed is worth a viewing. It just depends if this is something that you would go for. And again, I think, again, the whole concept of what I've said before, art is subjective, but from my point of view, I feel like it's offering something interesting. But that might be some people's cup of tea, and it might not be. But I think that's really all I can say. Any questions, comments, concerns? More than happy to answer them. But until next time, everybody.